Do you know about the great hotspots for romance during British days in Madras? On the occasion of Valentine's Day, let us look at two of them, Cupid's Bow and the Cenotaph, and what was their history, and some of the great romances that took place around those localities. Join me on a tour of old romantic Madras. Romance is a passion that is normally associated with the French. The British, with their stiff upper lip, are supposed to be immune. But you'd be amazed at the number of romances that broke out in Madras city. It was almost as though it was a rash. Perhaps the humidity had something to do with it. But in the 17th century, when the British first came here, there were hardly any women. And so it became the practice from England to ship them all out to Madras city, where they were certain to entice someone or the other and get married at the end of the season. Such girls were normally known as the fishing fleet. They came here fishing for a suitable partner in life. If they didn't get affianced within a matter of a month, there was something seriously wrong with them. And then they were sent up country. They went and got married to a planter or a businessman who was operating in one of the small towns. It was only very rarely that a woman came back without finding a partner after having been sent to Madras. But yet, in the 17th century, towards the close of the 1680s, there was one such woman, and that was Catherine Barker. Catherine Barker arrived from England and was not married at the end of 1 year. There was something really wrong with her. But she had determined that she would marry only Elihu Yale, the young and upcoming smart writer who was working his way up to becoming governor of Madras. Yale himself had set his sights on someone else. He was very keen to marry Catherine Hinmer, the wife of the second in command of Fort St. George. Hinmer himself, it was well known, did not have very long to live because he was very ill. And Catherine Hinmer, when he died, would become a rich widow. In 1687, Hinmer died and was taken to what was known as the Guava Garden Cemetery, which is where the High Court stands today, and was buried there. And in 1688, Yale married Catherine Hinmer, and she became Catherine Yale. The marriage took place in the church of St. Mary's in the fort. Even today, if you go behind the law college, you will find the huge obelisk that was erected in Hinmer's memory. Catherine Yale is not remembered here. Yale is remembered in Yale University, but it is Hinmer who is still remembered in Madras. Okay, but what happened to Catherine Barker, the woman who was wanting to marry our friend Elihu Yale? Yale very cleverly got her married to his close friend John Nix, and thereafter Mrs. Nix and Mr. Yale lived happily ever after in Madras. When Yale went back to England after his retirement as governor, Mrs. Nix went back with him, as did her husband John Nix. But she didn't like England, so she came back to Madras in order to manage Yale's vast properties over here. She died here and is buried in an unmarked grave. Back in England, Yale did not know that his beloved friend had passed away. In his will, he made behests to her and to several of her children. Yet another romance of Madras was that of Warren Hastings with the Baroness Imhoff. Anna Maria de Chappuset and her husband Baron Imhoff set out from England to come to Madras so that he could make a living as a portrait painter. On the same ship was Warren Hastings, and when he fell ill during the long journey, the Baroness Imhoff nursed him to good health, and the two fell deeply in love. Having come to Madras, Hastings settled in a house by the Church of St. Mary's in a street inside Fort St. George that is even now known as Church Lane. And that is where he lived along with Baron Imhoff and his wife, the Baroness. The whole of Madras was intrigued by this romance. Everybody was delighted to talk about it. A threesome living in a house, a ménage à trois. And then one day, Imhoff left to try his fortunes in the rest of the country as a portrait painter. He was a terrible painter and he didn't make much of a fortune. Eventually, he went back to England, leaving behind his wife in Madras with Warren Hastings. More excitement in this city. There in England, Imhoff filed for divorce, and the decree came after a few years. By the time Hastings had become Governor General of India, he had gone off to Calcutta, and along with him went the Baroness Imhoff. Hastings was not a man who did anything in a hurry. He kept her in a palatial house in Calcutta, awaiting the divorce, and as soon as it came, he married her. Giving her away in marriage was the Chief Justice of Calcutta, Sir Elijah Impey, who was a close friend of Warren Hastings. Thereafter, Hastings and Anna Maria lived happily ever after, going back to a life of retirement in England. The third romance is that of Robert Clive. Clive, as you know, was a manic depressive. He came to Madras, and the first thing he did was to load bullets into his revolver and press it to his temple. Nothing happened. He then opened a window and pressed the trigger once again, and the bullet sang out into the distance. He then determined that he had a purpose to live for in this city. Among the many purposes that he lived for, one of them, of course, was to fight a battle. He was happiest when he was at war with some country or some kingdom or the other. The other thing that made him enormously happy was to earn money through corruption. And the third was that he was in love. He had seen a portrait of Margaret Maskelyne, the sister of his close friend Edward Maskelyne, and he determined that a day would come when he would get married to her. Clive went on from success to success, his greatest being engineering the defeat of Chanda Sahib and the placing of Muhammad Ali on the throne of Arcot. And thereafter he was a big man indeed. Margaret Maskelyne sailed to Madras, and here the two got married in the church of St. Mary's inside the fort. It was yet another happy marriage, though Clive himself was never a happy man. After having made a huge success out of his career, earning a peerage, he went back to England and eventually succeeded in committing suicide. If those were the great romances of popular and famous personalities in this city, where did the rest of the British go whenever they needed to spend time with their beloveds? That was a place known as Cupid's Bow. Every evening, a procession of carriages would set out from Fort St. George and take the southern direction going towards San Thome. In the 17th and the 18th century, the Marina Beach did not exist. It was a narrow strip of sand. And just before the Marina Beach starts, where the river Kuvam enters the sea, there was a roundabout. And that is where the carriages went and parked themselves, and the young men came on horseback. It was compulsory to wear full formal evening wear on these occasions when people went riding, no matter how hot the weather. And this is where the men met their beloveds, many romances blossomed, some sadly withered away, a few ended in marriage and in long-term relationships. As the crowds of the young people from Fort St. George gathering at this roundabout began to increase, the place got a name. It came to be known as Cupid's Bow. Cupid was forever drawing an arrow on someone or the other in this locality. Eventually, the governors of Madras decided that it was not just enough for people to have conversation. So a bandstand was erected over there, and on weekends and on public holidays, a band would play music, invariably the governor's band. So there must have also been dancing on this location. Letters exist about Cupid's Bow, about how it looked and how people went all around it. One of the most famous letters is that written by Governor Lord Napier in the 1860s. And interestingly, he was writing it to a woman friend in Russia, and he was describing to her how beautiful or how unbeautiful, to coin a phrase, Cupid's bow looked. He didn't seem to be very enthusiastic about it. Thereafter, a huge roundabout was constructed to build a monument for Lord Cornwallis at the intersection of Tenampet village and Mount Road. Since it was a monument for Cornwallis, it came to be known as Cenotaph, and that road came to be known as the Cenotaph Road. People shifted from Cupid's bow and went all the way to the end of Cenotaph Road to ride their horses and their carriages and to romance. So that kind of became a second Cupid's bow. Today it is very difficult to imagine, in all that traffic, that there was a roundabout there around which people romanced at one point of time. What happened to the first Cupid's bow that was by the side of the river Kuvam? Eventually it gave way to the war memorial. Can you believe it, that a place where so much of romance had once taken place ended up being a place where the First World War and thereafter all other wars that have been fought have all been commemorated? It's very interesting that Cupid should have finally given way to the war god Mars.